from what I heard.
Oh yeah.
There we
Yes.
Come come May. Sorry, guys, I'm so sick.
go.
I
Oh,
have a I have a really bad cold, so I think I'm gonna stay off camera.
oh dear. Get well soon.
I
We need you
mean, wait,
strong.
who's on here?
So we have our working group from Bosnia and Herzegovina. We have people from Chicago, from Alma's from Chicago. We have Jordan. Jordan, where are you? Washington?
No, no, no. Northern California, the Bay Area.
Then we have Azem from the Boston area and Patrick from St. Louis. Professor Pettigrew
Right.
and Valida is in LA.
Right. Walida and I do not have snow and minus below zero temperatures. I got to.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
Chicago
Okay.
is great. It's snowing now, so it's no longer minus 30 Celsius. It's now minus 15, so it's
Oh,
great. We're good.
balmy. No, it's warming up. That's great.
Actually, you know what? I'm gonna stop being vain. I'm gonna switch on the camera.
Hmm.
Okay, guys, so we're gonna start now. So welcome everyone. Thank you for making time to join us and this very important topic and discussion, very relevant today. So my name is Vildana Bjedic and I'm with the Working Group for Bosnia and Herzegovina, which is a 501(c)(4) organization based in the United States. We're all volunteers. We're a volunteer-led organization, non-governmental, non-political, and non-religious organization. We're committed to peace, justice, and transatlantic cooperation. And today, as part of our regular roundtable, we have it's an honor to have our guest Harun Mehmedinović join us today. And yes, Harun. So let me introduce you a little bit. He's a cinematographer and he's a co-producer on Ice on Fire, a feature documentary for HBO, um, which premiered in the official selection at the Cannes Film Festival 2019. And he's a cinematographer of IMAX Grand Canyon, Rivers of Time, and co-cinematographer of, I don't know how to pronounce this. It's a Akisita. Harun, help me.
Akitchta.
Akichita. It's
Yeah.
a documentary film which also premiered at the Sundance Film Festival in 2018. And his latest film, Legion 44, from 2024, is currently working on biochar effect and the acts of reburial, which is the project that we're going to discuss today and have Harun introduce. So, Harun, yeah, welcome. The floor is yours. Maybe you can start with showing one of your videos
I was
recently.
going to show one just in case people haven't seen one. And I was going to show one that actually is not the typical video that I do. It's a little different because it's more of a history lesson, but it's an important one because it does address all these points that project addresses in sort of a microcosm for the entire situation in Balkans, really. But I'm going to play this and then I apologize about the if anybody needs the closed captions, and this YouTube version does not really have them, and when I turn them on, they're totally inaccurate. So I'll just play it, and if you need closed captions, I'll send you the video separately, and you can find it on the other channels of mine in with closed captions. So
every few decades, monsters descend upon the sleepy little village nested in a national park, murdering thousands of locals, and each time, for mysterious reasons, the surviving villagers develop amnesia and are completely unprepared and shocked next time it happens. In the mid-14th century, Ottoman Empire began advancing into Europe. On their way, they encountered a striking region full of mountain chains, incredible wild rivers, and dense forests. However, in sharp contrast to the beauty of the landscape was the immense, dark-age brutality of some living there. Ottomans coined the name for the region to fit their impressions using two Turkish words, Bal and Kan, meaning honey and blood. We know it today as Balkans. Their final stop in this advance into Europe is the Bosnian village right behind me, on the gorgeous river Una, where Ottoman Sultan built the westernmost mosque of the Ottoman Empire, Sultan Ahmed Mosque, and named the town around it Kulen Vakuf. For the next 5 centuries, Ottomans ruled this land. The local beys and pashas, governors of different regions, collected taxes from the locals. Locals who were Muslim would pay lower taxes, which led to indigenous locals inside of this little village to convert to Islam. As the years went on, the empire weakened and the taxes grew. Local farmers, majority of whom were Orthodox Christian Serbs, were allowed some amount of autonomy and practice of their religion as long as those taxes were paid. However, at some point, those taxes became so high they became untenable. In 1873, a group of local Serbs proposed a revolt, but the majority of farmers were afraid to confront the Ottomans. So the 3 organizers, Jovo Trkulja, Stevo Marinković, and Jovo Mandić, went to the nearby village of Strbac at midnight. In his letter, found in Karlovac Orthodox Patriarchate, Trkulja states, "We set fire to around 40 Serbian houses, ignoring the screams of the children and wails of their parents." So this false flag attack was blamed on local Muslims, and the desired effect was accomplished. All the neighboring villages rose up. They stormed the area of Kulen Vakuf. They murdered, raped, and pillaged. The resulting carnage was so vast that Trkulja stated in his letter, "As far as I know, the dogs were dragging them for a month later, and the stench was even hitting here." And here was quite a few kilometers away where his village was. Finally, at the end of this pogrom, they burned down that mosque. So then the Ottoman Empire ended and the Austro-Hungarian Empire took over. But the Muslim locals seemingly completely forgot what happened, and thus began their culture of amnesia. The chickens would come home to roost in 1941, when monsters returned again, coming from the same set of villages, again and again to everybody's surprise. One of the eyewitnesses to the resulting massacre, a man called Abbas Mushata, remembers, and I quote, "We slowly headed towards Vakuf, and the silence was disturbed only by the crackling of the fire from the burning houses. Suddenly I see a slaughtered woman lying in a light grey shroud. Her lower body was half naked, and next to her, sitting, was a small infant, trying to feed on her breast. I recognized her, Mina Bojčić. I was petrified with fear. After this atrocity, similar scenes began to continue as if I were watching some kind of a horror movie. To the left and the right, along the road, were slaughtered and massacred women and children. Next to us, in the opposite direction, drunk Serb peasants and their peasant wives, who were also drunk, passing in the direction of Martin Brod, a Serbian village nearby. Each of them carried some means of killing, most often iron clubs used to kindle fires. Those clubs were certainly looted from the Vakuf houses, shops and taverns, where they'd been robbing and drinking all day and night, which could clearly be seen from the way they staggered. Then, on the side of the road, I see a young, very beautiful, oval-faced peasant woman. The lower part of her skirt was thrown back towards the upper part of her body, so that she was naked to the waist. On the left side of this unfortunate woman sat a little girl with curly brown hair in a white dress, facing her mother, waving and gesticulating with her hands. The child was still so small that she did not realize that her mother was dead. So that day, women threw children into Una River and jumped behind them to avoid the rapes in which the wives of the rapists would hold down the women while their husbands raped them, then slit their throats, then murder their children. And the only reason why some survived was because communist Serbs gathered remaining women and hid them into a school, which they guarded with their own bodies from the advancing drunk berserk Serb villagers. By the time the massacre was over, 60% of the Bosnian Muslim population of Kula and Vakuf and surrounding areas was murdered. Again, for reasons unknown, locals developed amnesia and forgot. This would again come to have terrible consequences when in 1992, the extremists returned again, this time kidnapping all the Bosniak men of the area and taking them to beatings, torture, and finally executions, as Serb extremists attempted to create a greater Serbia ethno-state. Again, nobody could foresee this coming. No weapons to defend themselves. Shocked and surprised all over again. Now, 33 years later, the locals tell me that only 20 come to the commemoration of deaths of hundreds of men from this area in 1992. Again, the amnesia has set in. I asked if they had any weapons to defend themselves if the monsters, the extremists, would come again. And the answer was no. When I tried engaging the locals about details of what happened here in 1992, many just told me, I can't talk about it, or I simply don't remember the details anymore. So it's safe to say that it's just a matter of time now when this will all repeat again. Many have asked me, why do Bosniak people have a culture of amnesia? Well, nobody really knows for sure, but there's some theories that have been offered. One of them is that Bosnian Muslims live by the forgive and forget philosophy, which some refer to with the word merhametli, which in Turkish means merciful and compassionate. So essentially, in order to move on, they say we forgive and let's just forget and let's not think about what happened, let's move on. Another theory is that the Bosnian people are in the infancy of their nationhood and that they're merely a toddler still crawling as far as understanding and valuing their own history. In fact, there are thousands of theories. Everybody seems to have their own theory, but the results are about the same. History keeps repeating. Engaging in culture of amnesia is not moving on. It's abdicating responsibility towards those who died and the lessons of their deaths. And it renders their loss in vain. It is also a betrayal of those who are to come, children and their children's children, who will be unprepared when the extremists come again. So the mosque behind me has been destroyed 4 times. It was destroyed once in 1873 and it was destroyed 3 times during the 20th century. It is not a surprise that the most destroyed mosque in all of Balkans is the westernmost mosque of the Ottoman Empire. Well, it's been 3 decades now since the last time the mosque has been destroyed. The chants of nationalism, chauvinism, and dehumanization are growing louder and louder around here. The extremists lurk in the mountains and the forests, while the sleepy villages like this, mired in endless reverie, await for another rude awakening. And I'm just worried that at some point there won't be any people left to engage in culture of amnesia.
There's that for you.
Thank you.
So I'm gonna just stop this thing and cut it.
Thank you. How long was this in total? How many minutes?
That one was like 9 minutes or something.
Very powerful.
Typically I try to keep them under 10 minutes just because my whole idea at some point, and we'll talk about it here, but when I came to want to do this project, my initial thought was to just do a massive amount of research for a documentary. However, the more I researched, the more I understood and just got to understand the width and the breadth of how complicated things are here. And this video only scratches the surface because it doesn't include a whole ton of other things. I just understood that there's no way I'm going to take this and address it in the right way just by simply doing a documentary film. I just figured there has to be a social media component. I think people today with their short attention spans, I don't know that they can handle even a 10-minute movie, 10-minute video for a lot of them. So I just figured as a kind of a byproduct of going around probably 150 villages that I visited, and I visited all kinds of villages. This is not a project that's aimed at the Bosniak people's genocide. It is obviously as it relates to 1992 through 1995, because it is the clear-cut genocide that happened. It also involves, obviously, going back in history, it involves also deaths and suffering of other civilians that did happen, both in World War II and that happened in 1992 to 1995, not nearly to the same degree in number, but I figured that it's important to actually unearth all that and put all that on the table so people understand the situation generally. And that's sort of the kind of general thing that happened is, I went in with one idea, I came out of it slightly with a different idea. I just understood something about the region that I did not going in, which is the sheer amount of, let's just put it, evil that was just kind of emptied out, especially in the 1992, which is not a year we really think about a lot. Because when we think about the genocide in Bosnia, whenever it's discussed, we think about Srebrenica. So we really think about towards the end of the war, which is mid-1995. But vast majority of things that I learned, some of the most horrific things that I learned that relate to a genocide really happened in 1992, bulk of them. So I immediately knew there's a whole ton of stuff here that nobody really knows about unless they're part of our community, and a lot of people in our community don't know about. And as soon as I started talking to people, even people that are highly educated on some of these subjects, they simply did not know half the things that I was learning. And in some cases, their mind was just blown. They were like, how did I miss this? Well, you missed it partly because we're very tunnel visioned sometimes. Like we'll focus on something, investigate that. But when you're trying to look at it in a macro point of view, and you're trying to look at Bosnia, also obviously the surrounding areas, the context of it, how things came about, where things have happened, you can't really be too tunnel visioned. You have to understand that there were things happening everywhere to different degrees. And I, for example, was an absolute ignoramus, to put it mildly, about the region of Krajina, with the exception of Prijedor, which obviously I had heard about. I was familiar with some aspects of Prijedor genocide. I had no idea the levels of suffering that were, for example, in Sanski Most, in Ključ, and in other places like Kotor Varoš, for example, an area I knew nothing about whatsoever. So in other words, as I started learning, I just understood that, besides other things, roughly around between April 1st and I would say probably about end of August of 1992, there was a very concerted, highly planned out genocide campaign, which affected every part of Bosnia in most horrific ways. It just manifested slightly differently in one place than the other. In some places, it was more focused on rapes. In some places, it was more focused on murders overall. When you look at something like Foča, there were a lot of murders, but the amount of rape in Foča was overwhelming, right? But then you go to another place and you're looking at obviously primarily a massive amount of killing. And I think Krajina really falls under that category. So as I started to understand that, I really figured this is something we have to educate people about. I think the lessons of it are critical everywhere on earth. I was reading things in some of these massacres, like Prhovo, for example, speaking of Ključ, was a massacre. When I read it, it reminded me of another massacre, which is Wounded Knee, because it almost played the same way. Like if you read the Wounded Knee, which is in South Dakota, which has happened 1890, I believe, was a big massacre of the Lakota people in South Dakota on Pine Ridge Reservation. If you read the account of what happened there, so like eyewitness accounts, and you look at eyewitness account of Prhovo, it almost plays like the same event. It has so many exact same points that I was shocked. And then I figured, this idea of a genocide, of how one is executed, seems to be highly interrelated no matter where you go. And because we are not so far in distance from Bosnian genocide, it's really important to talk about it now, because if we're not talking about something 150 years ago, which people can just say, okay, well, that was 150 years ago. No, this is in our lifetime. But the events that happened were practically things you would have seen back 150 years ago. And obviously, in other parts in history. And I at some point figured, if we educate the outside world, which has known nothing practically about the Bosnian genocide outside of a mention of Srebrenica, maybe they heard about Sarajevo, but outside of Srebrenica, they really did not understand generally what happened. And now that they are beginning to understand it, because I'm hearing from tens of thousands of people at this point, they have a huge interest in this for a variety of reasons. But anyway, that's kind of the general sort of summary. If there's something particular you guys would want to talk about, we can talk about that.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say it is very difficult to talk about these subjects. That's why maybe a lot of people don't want to talk about it. They're just like, oh, let's just forget about it because you combine you really hit people into spaces of trauma and in the spaces of remembrance. So it's not easy for anyone, but I personally find that the only way to heal is through truth. So your project is not only it's a very healing when you stop denying and when you look facts in a face that you that's the path to healing from that particular trauma. Because I think the biggest enemy for us here is the comfort. So why a lot of people, my friends, they even tell me like, oh my gosh, Aldana, but why are you going to there? Why are you going to these places of pain? Why are you causing yourself even more pain? Like, why don't you go on a nice vacation somewhere? I can still go on a nice vacation, but I feel it's my obligation, my duty, to go and visit those places and participate in the remembrance and participate in reburial, not of bodies, but of the truth. I'm digging the truth that was buried. So yeah, I think the biggest enemy here is the comfort. Oh, let's just move on, whatever. But I also think at the same time, we need to participate in this cultural resistance. It's a refusal to let truth be buried alongside the dead. So I wanted to ask you, throughout your work, have you faced resistance or challenges, pressure from from any institutions, from any people? And if yes, how do you deal with that? Do you have any advice for people that are facing oppression, like resistance and like critique or somebody who's trying to slow you down in your project?
Well, I think Bosnian culture in general is one of like burying things, right? So why did I call it acts of reburial? Is because everybody's doing some burying, right? So, and I think it sounds harsh when I say that Bosnians, by doing some of that are actually doing the bidding of the genociders by trying to bury your own history. You are essentially doing the work for them. You're doing unpaid work for psychopaths if you do that kind of behavior. And I'm trying to have us have a discussion about that because people are very much, and I still deal with this. If I'm going to be dealing with any challenges, sometimes it's just going to these places and people do not want to talk about anything. They always say maybe a couple of words, maybe they'll say a couple of sentences that really, okay, they'll start talking about something and then they're going to say, okay, you know what, I'm not going to talk about it. And I've found that in most places that I went, there's at least a few people like that. Then occasionally you'll run into a person that's very talkative, that understands what's going on and feels like this needs to be explained and people need to learn. But with that being said, institutions of Bosnia, that's a whole other discussion. So I've reached out probably to all of them. The ones that responded and are very positive, I would say, is the few that deal with the research of genocide. They immediately figured we really don't have a lot of English materials and we don't produce them. We certainly don't make videos about it. So they knew immediately it's like a massive underserved area. And they just do not have the people to do it. So they immediately recognize this is something we need to support, at least by supporting it with research. So books, articles, sources, and so on. Outside of that, there's really been no other people that have stepped at least so far. There's one meeting that I had that may have been a positive meeting outside of that realm, but outside of that, really people did not respond or they just responded, we're not interested, which is interesting. And this also involves a lot of people that you would think would care about the subject and would find it important, but they're not. But I think that's an extension of this in unwillingness really to deal with the subject and being afraid to deal with it for a variety of different reasons, sometimes very innocent reasons and sometimes maybe nefarious reasons in some cases, I don't know. But there's that problem. And I've also heard from Smajo Besho, who does obviously similar kind of project to mine, not exactly the same. He focuses really on Stolets largely, and he talks about his own life experience. But I've talked to him, and he's described his experience, which has been much longer than mine. He's been doing it for about 10 years of just walking around London and surrounding areas in Britain and educated largely in that area about Bosnian genocide. He said that he has faced an enormous amount of pushback, for example, from our institutions and our people, and even some people that have tried to block him outright from doing certain things. So he just has a much longer experience, so he can speak for himself, and he has in his videos about what some of his challenges are for him. But I've expected that just from having understood a little bit of the history around here as it relates to the subject. I expected there will be some amount of pushback, or some people will. I mean, I think I did an interview with Stav, which I think that interview that I did recently brought up some of these questions. One of them being, are you afraid that you're going to be called a nationalist? And I'm like, well, not really, because I'm going to be roasting Bosniaks as much as I am anybody throughout this project, because we are such forgetful people. And we are so at times disrespectful of our own history and our own people who died and all sorts of other things. So there'll be things I'll say that certainly are not going to make me well liked within the Bosniak community, because I'm going to try to face them with some facts and realities of their behavior and the way they've conducted themselves. And you know what? I feel like I have the truth on my side. I feel like I have the moral sort of base on my side, because I'm speaking out of the grave. Like, people that can't speak for themselves, I'm going to give them as much voice as I can in each of these stories. They're largely focused on people who are no longer alive. That I feel like I have the right to say certain things, because I feel like when I go to a lot of these places and people tell me nobody has stepped into this village for 25 years, I think I have some amount of right to say people should have, and people now need to step in, and we need to stop engaging in our sort of forgetfulness, to put it positively, or just outright sort of disrespect of our own history. So in that sense, I said to them, and I could say here, all these sort of traps they've set for people of quote unquote, are you a nationalist by talking about genocide? No, I'm actually just stating, largely court established facts, or facts that have been established with an enormous amount of research where there aren't court cases, meaning there's plenty of evidence for it. So there's propaganda, which is just inventing all sorts of stuff. And there's what I'm trying to do here, which is just state things that have not been stated and have people start a discussion. And I figured, since Bosniaks may not want to have this discussion, outsiders might want to have it, meaning people from the outside of the region that can finally learn things in English and can start talking about it and linking it to other genocides and all that. I feel like we could maybe build a support network of people that are now well educated about our genocide, that can actually be fighters for us in places where we are not such good fighters for ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a comment, if I may.
That was Jordan, sorry, yes?
Yeah. So two things. I just wonder for Bosniaks, maybe not so much forgetfulness as, and David could address this too, as denial perhaps, but even beyond that, honestly, I'm feeling in this country, as much as I don't want to, sort of a helplessness. I'm wondering if Bosniaks are feeling that because of the history. And it's like, what good am I going to do by talking about it? So I'll move on. The second, not related, is I'm wondering too, in some sense, if ICTY didn't do a major disservice to the actual genocides that took place all over Bosnia. I commend the Srebrenica Memorial Center. I think it's an amazing place, and they do a lot. But it certainly, like we said, has dominated, the genocide narrative. When, as you mentioned, Harun, Foča, Visegrad, I mean, there are so many places where genocides took place. And certainly there were war crimes committed, and they were convicted criminals. But I'm wondering too if that somehow just doesn't take the wind out of the sails of people in other places that are not Srebrenica.
100%. I would say there's great things ICTY did, meaning you brought up the cases, you've legitimized it. There's a sense of legitimacy by doing that, as opposed to having local court take it on first. It's good they have international court take it on first. And there's been lots and lots of testimonies that happened under ICTY. Those are important. They've now been made part of record. So that's all great. My complaint, and I'm sure everybody has their complaint about ICTY, and some people have already told me when I voice my complaint, well, who are you to say anything? I've heard some of that from Bosniaks, but anyway, or others. But anyway, my issue with them relates particularly to genocide or to framework of genocide. And I'm going to give them a little bit of an excuse in one sense, which is that this was the first time after World War II the genocide has even been mass prosecuted, meaning like you're taking people to prosecute them. What framework are you using? That is not what Nuremberg used. Nuremberg did not use ICTY's framework. And in fact, if you were to use ICTY's genocide framework, they would have actually released half the Nazis of that charge. They would not have been, and in fact, there's a great study that was done this, I believe it was Cambridge or Oxford. There was somebody who did an actual study on what it would have meant if ICTY had prosecuted Nazi Germany. And it did not look good for ICTY from a genocide point of view. In fact, that was the massive amount of criticism within, a study that was done on it. So we have to accept that they didn't get everything right. And one thing they did not get right, and I'm pretty a strong believer in that, is a question of genocide. Now, the other point you brought up, which is that people have kind of started giving up because they're feeling like, okay, what am I going to change about this? I believe that is part of the reality of it. I think there's the way that sort of trauma has manifested in Bosniaks often manifests like that. And I call it, and maybe it sounds harsh, like inferiority complex a little bit on part of Bosniaks. And there's a little bit of that in the same way that we sort of bury it on one end. There's definitely a superiority complex happening in like Serb extremist side of things, some Croatian extremist side of things, where they're going to basically invent all sorts of events and say that these things happen and those things happen, and then nobody from our side is pushing back on that. So they're essentially trying to establish lies and really firmly root them, lies of which there's no proof, right? But what I found interesting about that is that in the places where Bosniaks have not spoken back, there's a kind of an area of opportunity for me, where I've noticed something, which is that Serb extremists, for example, and I think I could say the same thing for Croatian extremists, they do not talk about legitimate places where there were Serb civilians and Croat civilians died. I'll use a couple of examples. Briševo by Prijedor. And I'm going to use another example. That was the Croatians that were wiped out completely out of a village in Prijedor. And another event on the other side, which is, for example, Bravnice, which was a big massacre of Serb civilians retreating towards Banja Luka, close to Jajce. It was done by HBO. It was the Croatian army. So these were two events that literally nobody was talking about. And the reason why they weren't talking about them partly was, on one hand, they were so busy trying to establish Kravice, a non-existent massacre, which was taken on by ICTY. They attempted to prosecute to see what happened there. There was no 3,500 Serbs dead in Kravice. But the reason why they were pushing it is because Kravice is down the road from Srebrenica. And Kravice is also where other murders happened during the Srebrenica genocide. So in other words, the opportunity I thought there was an interesting opportunity for me is to say that I ultimately care about Serb civilians, and I do more than Serb extremists do. And I care more about Croatian civilians than Croatian extremists do, because they use them essentially as meat puppets. They use them essentially just as pawns in their game, which is to try to establish an entity, eventually to separate that entity into a greater Croatia, greater Serbia situation. So in other words, I can actually start unearthing some of the violence towards civilians that aren't Bosniak in a way that, people that are very loudmouths about representing Serbs and representing Croats never do. They never do that. And part of the reason why they don't do that is because they're in cahoots to try to split the country up. So it's not so convenient for Croatian extremists to talk about Serbs that have wiped out our village in Prijedor, because we're trying to get Serbs to help us to split the country up. You guys you catching my drift here? So in other words, they've left an opportunity for me to roast them, completely roast them, which is great. So in all these terrible things, there's some, let's just say, silver linings, if we can put it that way. And one of them is that their own extremists have literally given me all the weapons that I need to absolutely roast them on all the sort of hypocrisies they live by, and so on.
Thank you, Harun. Jordan, I hope this answers your question. We have two more questions from the audience, Alma and then Valida. And then I'm going to give it to Professor David Pettigrew. But I want to start. Alma, you were the first one. Okay, here we are. Go ahead, Alma.
Thank you, Vildana. Thanks, Harun. It's so great to be here with you. I'm interested in a couple of things. First, I will give a comment from my perspective. For those of you who I don't know, I'm teaching at Loyola University. I'm a sociologist and criminologist. And part of the problem that I see in my work is that usually when we are talking about genocide and we are talking about war crimes, crimes against humanity, and when we are relying on the rule of law and court cases, the language simply does not work. The language that is written, the language that is spoken, elapses. Victims are expected to be rational when they are talking about horrific things. The law does not capture that, because when people are traumatized, emotional about sharing with what happened with them, keeping record of that simply does not give details and accounts of everything that people went through. Another thing is language itself, that we have records from ICTY are records that were captured through interpreting. And I think a lot of that is really a problem. We had a lot of good people who wrote about Bosnia, but very few who actually took time to visit these villages like you are doing, right? And to actually speak to them in their own language, in the way in which they speak. Not to translate that into some sort of sophisticated, rational language that the audience can comprehend, right? And I think what you are doing is really very unique, and I really admire you for what you do, because I know how hard it is. You have to go from a village to village that I and my family have heard of, but I've never been to personally. So it really is different. But you also have a camera and a voice that you give to the people who have been voiceless for so long. So that's very unique and different. But what I'm interested in is in how did this happen to you, right? What happened that you decided from California that this is now something worthwhile investigating, and you are going to do this personally, not hire a crew that's going to do this for you, but really do it directly and personally? And how did this happen in terms of your own inspiration? And what kinds of lessons did you learn doing this? And what is it that can be done better?
Well, I mean, obviously, so how did this start for me was, back, I already had started dabbling into some of these subjects with a short film that I did. At this point, this would be about almost 20 years ago. It's called In and the Sun. And that was really about forgiveness, and it was really about this question of like survivor's guilt and all that stuff that I was kind of dealing with. Everybody was, to some extent, I feel like, dealing with in the Bosnian community at that time. And I felt like I had a lot of hope that somehow everything that's happened in Bosnia during the war, during the genocide, I should not really be referring it to a war either. I need to kind of get it out of my system. I feel like I've been brainwashed referring it to a war. There was no war. It was absolute butchery. So I was, already I had a lot of this on my mind, but I had a misconception. I thought maybe there's an opportunity after this had all happened to have some kind of reconciliatory process. Turns out there was no reconciliatory process. In fact, we have codified into practically law and custom all the denialism, all the problems, and now it's coming sort of home to roost slowly. As you have all these places that should have been preserved places, like we talked about Kravica earlier, the Kravica warehouse, they actually redid the building, which should have been a museum used to teach people what happened there, and obviously full of evidence. Like, it had something like 10,000 bullet holes in it, for example, that location, and they now have redone it, quote unquote, redone it, renovated it to get rid of it, essentially. So we are seeing this kind of machinery to erase everything. And because our people are not so keen to talk to the outside world, we have no allies out there on the subject, right? Like, say, for example, that we go to Dachau, right? I was there not that long ago. And I was thinking, and I was there, what if somebody took over parts of this place and started turning them into a parking lot? That probably wouldn't fly, would it? Would it? That would be an international incident, and potentially a serious one. But we have thousands of locations in this country, and I think David can speak to that. He's visited more of them than I have, where they're just being completely erased. Not only are they not marked, meaning that they don't have any sort of memorial associated with them, because in many places they're forbidden these memorials unless they're on private grounds. And private area memorials are a problem because they're often off the road. You have to really have an effort to go and find them. We need center of town kind of memorials. We need memorials on sides of roads, but they have made that impossible pretty much across the board. So I figured, and we're somewhat guilty of some of that as well. I'm talking about Bosniaks because in Ternopolje, for example, where there was a room allocated to a little museum, none of us did it. It's an empty room. So the little story I'm doing there is really interesting because we have been given an opportunity to memorialize, but we're choosing not to do that. All right. So in other words, we are also doing disservice to ourselves. But by and large, this is a denialism problem. And now I'm getting to understand the levels of denialism. And frankly, I think they're unique. I really can't think of such a situation anywhere else on earth quite in the same way. There's absolutely denialism everywhere of different kinds. But this kind of denialism we're seeing here is it's like a unique brand that I've never quite seen anywhere else, and it needs to be discussed. And I think it's shocking just at face value for what it is. I think if people to understand what happened in these places, which they don't, and then understand that people have not gone to jail for having done these horrible things by and large, especially people who have executed it because they prosecuted only people who have given orders often, that now we're getting to understand horrible things happen and absolutely horrible things happen, which are like so medieval at times that are hard to understand and comprehend and digest, even for our own people, much less an outsider. And they almost sound fake at times. Some of these things are so over the top that I think a lot of people are going to look at them and say, can this possibly be real? Unfortunately, I got to tell you, it is real. And there's actually a historical precedent for some of those things. It's not the first time they've happened. There's lots and lots of a trail of evidence for that kind of behavior. But we need to educate people about that and then go a step past that and say nobody's been punished, and then also go past that and say it's actually being erased. So not only are they not going to be punished, as soon nobody may remember any of it, which then sets into motion what I would say is the follow-up genocide. So if we are in stage 10 of this genocide, according to the 10 stages of the genocide, we are stage 4 of the next genocide, right there. And that's going to could quickly escalate to another stage, right? So it's important that we handle this at this kind of, I would say, unique opportunity in time where there's a resurgence of interest in the questions of genocide. There's a worldwide resurgence of interest in the questions of genocide in a way that we haven't seen. So we can't lose an opportunity here. So I felt if I don't get this done and I get it going, and I self-financed it, frankly, that it's just not going to happen. We're going to miss an opportunity. And I was frankly shocked when I started doing research how few of any kind of English language videos about anything. So this is just, it was even worse than I thought, really, as I researched it more. And what did I learn? What happened in a way that I didn't know before. And I learned that there may be some opportunities in which things can be influenced. I don't know if I can directly influence Bosnia, but I feel like I can influence some of the parts of the outside world to really start paying attention to us and actually become advocates on our behalf. And I think it's important to have that. I think it's important to have people, non-Bosnians, speak about the Bosnian situation out of a place of education. They understood it. They've done their own research now that I've offered them all these places, because every place that I mention, any village that I go to, you can go and research those things. I'm not just making stuff up. Names I'm mentioning are actual names. They were in court cases most of the time. They're in testimonies. You can go and research. There's a whole world I couldn't cover in 10 minutes. I'm just scratching the surface. I'm just suggesting to people these things happen, go do your own research, and then, be an advocate on our behalf. And I think that would be more important to me, is to get tens of millions of advocates on Bosnian behalf who are not Bosnians than for me to try to change a system here that is very difficult to change, might be impossible.
Thank you. Thank you, Harun. I mean, I really love your comparison of Dachau, which is, I'm sure everyone knows, a camp outside of Munich. I actually grew up in Munich and I went to high school there, and it was mandatory for us as students of a high school, public school. We had to go to Dachau and, learn everything about it into detail. And yeah, good question. If Dachau was, made into a parking lot, and just that's what they did in Bosnia. Like all these sites were, they kind of disappeared just to remove the evidence and for us not to remember and not to know. And as you said, yeah, it's just continuation of the genocide. So, but I also have to say that, all the authoritarian movements across the world, not just in Bosnia, but, from Eastern Europe, from United States, Middle East, they're all actively trying to rewrite history, erase all the past atrocities, and normalize nationalist voices. So in that context, your project is a really I would say, is like a cultural resistance, and
Yes.
it just refusal to let the truth be buried alongside the dead. So let's go to Valida. She had her hand up.
Hey,
Welcome, Valida.
hey. Thank you. First of all, thank you so much for this forum, and also, Harun, thank you so much for finally doing something about this. I cannot tell you the frustration I've felt all these years, like living in the diaspora, and just, every year on July 11th, it's all about Srebrenica. And I'm just like, well, what about all these other towns? Why is that the only genocide when we've heard the horrific stories about, Eastern Bosnia? Because I'm from Gorazde, just like Vicky, and my dad is from Foča. So I knew of all the stories, like they're very personal stories, and they kept happening. We've gone through it in the 40s, and then we went through it in at the turn of the century as well, last century. So I want you to maybe touch on not just the issue of amnesia that Bosnians have, but the culture of shame associated with these repeated crimes, and also how it fits in the context of Bosnia as, predominantly or was majority Muslim nation, and how it's a survival tactic in order to sort of kind of like fit in and
Yeah.
not really just to shy away from its identity. Because I have friends who are politicians right now in Bosnia. You will never hear them talk about this.
No.
Their whole, um, campaign is based on like, oh, let's join Europe. It's all about integrating. It's all about, being part of this European, which we do need to be. We are Europe, but also I'm just, it's frustrating when this is completely buried. And I'm so grateful that you're finally digging it up. And I'm glad to be part of this. I want to say, like, initial team of people that are super supportive. The other thing I wanted to ask you, what, I mean, you touched on this a little bit about the end goal, how you want more world advocates about this project. What is some of the other end goals that you see with this project? Would it be more like, I wanna say that we need to teach this in history books in Bosnia. Like, it's not part of like the broader, like, it's not in the focus in our history books. And I feel like that's one thing. And I don't know if there's any way we could influence the education system in the other entity, and how that would, if we could mandate through the courts, through the court system, if there's a possibility for them to actually start, you know, teaching this in schools, because we are growing up as a nation next to another nation who is hell bent on another genocide. I mean, that's a fact. And so, how can we play a part in preventing this strategically through education?
So let's go back a little bit. Shame, question on shame. There's definitely a culture of shame. I feel like often our people, Bosniaks, feel like they are ashamed of their own genocide. Like, it's a very strange thing, like where they don't want to talk about it, and there's like all sorts of shame to that. I don't know how I can change that, honestly. It is so embedded. I just wish if I start talking and maybe get loud enough, maybe more people will join. So it'll be like a riot. I'll throw the first few rocks, and the rest of them are going to join in wanting to talk about it. With this question of education, I'm not so sure. I really don't know any sort of way, at least I'm not familiar with. There's going to be people better educated than me, that one can, within the current Dayton structure, do much about that part of it. They even had a law that they've passed recently, and maybe David would know a little bit more about this than me, but the law they passed on genocide denial, where like if you outright deny something that's a court established fact, you're supposed to be taken to court over that and to jail. And it did jail recently a guy, I think, for like a couple of years, and they jailed another guy for taking photos of himself on a mass grave doing like Serb nationalist stuff. So he went to one of our mass grave areas and was taking these photos, and he published them actually on his Instagram, and he got 20,000 people followed him off of that. He's gotten more followers. I'm going to make a point now about something. He's gotten more followers off of one photo that he took on dancing on people's graves than I have in 20 videos that have reached millions of people. Think about that a little bit. Think about that a little bit. All right. So, in other words, we have a serious problem here, right? Where you have a lot of zest behind this denialism and support of people who are denying. So, not just people who have done crimes, but people who are their aiders and abettors. So, the idea that we're going to change that, which is a cultural, deep-seated cultural problem, has become less of an interest to me. I do support anybody who's a Serb in Bosnia or Serb in Serbia or Croat in Bosnia or Croat in Serbia who are people who are reasonable about this issue and want the truth to come out and want things to heal and want the reconciliation. I support these people. I know a few of them. The problem here is that I don't think you're going to change the zeitgeist of a culture that's essentially committing suicide because that's what's happening, that you're going to somehow make a shift on that. It's more like they will need to go off the cliff. So as they go off the cliff, my concern is that our people, the Bosniaks, don't get suckered and sucked into another situation where they're taking us off the cliff with them. Does that make sense with everybody? Which is why in my video on the lessons of Bosnian genocide, I put literally first 2 points are get guns, get organized. It sounds ridiculous. It makes me sound like an NRA guy. I'm not. I don't like guns. I don't support NRA. It's not who I am. Right? Makes me sound like a right winger. I'm not. Very much a left winger. I just live in a real world. And in a real world, there are people who show up with guns to your door and then rape your family in front of you and then kill you all. Right? That's the world that I'm familiar with. And now I've learned hundreds of such villagers that have gone through that. So I don't live in some kind of fantasy world where I'm going to be like, you know what? Let's just get rid of all the guns and everything's going to be fine. You're not going to get rid of the guns here. This is one of the most heavily armed places where civilians have the most weapons. I'm talking about around us. Serbia is number 6, I believe, on a list of ownership of weapons in a world. The top 6, probably higher than that. Who knows? So in other words, there's guys out there that have plenty of guns. So this idea that if another genocide happens, what are we going to defend ourselves with butter knives? Are we going to like plead them away to? I mean, read the history, understand what the hell you're dealing with. So in other words, my point was, it made me sound like a radical almost when I come out and say guns and don't allow people to take your guns, because that's the story of every freaking village. There's some villages where they came back 7 times asking for guns, and then when they were 100% sure that all the guns were removed, that's when they genocided the village. Like understand what the hell you're dealing with here. So that's why I'm telling people I'm not so concerned about changing everything. I don't think I have any power to change that, but maybe I have power to explain to people that you need to have a lot of guns, period. And it makes me
Agreed.
sound like I'm an NRA representative out here, but I'm just living in a real world. If those villagers in 1992 had guns, I assure you there wouldn't have been all those rapes quite in the same way. It wouldn't have transpired the same way. A lot of people's lives would have been saved, oddly enough, by having more of those guns, period.
Thank you, Harun. I'm really sorry to interrupt, but we're running out of time. We have Sedin one more question, but I thank you, Valida. Very, very good question that we're asking here. And yeah, nobody wants to, have guns, right? It's not in nature, like who wants to have guns, but
Yeah.
we have to, live in reality. And I think there was a list recently published by country and their strength of their military very recently, and Bosnia is like way behind most countries. I think like 150 something at the end. So Sedin has a question, and then we're going to go to Dr. Professor David Pettigrew. Hi,
Okay.
Sedin. Welcome.
Hi. Thank you, and thank you, Harun, for what you have been doing for Bosnia and for our culture of remembrance. I don't know if you have heard of Association Bosna in Vienna, and Mirza Tokača, and
I know the name. I know the name. Yeah.
yeah, and Aldo Husseinović, and
Yes,
I
of
don't
course.
know if you, and I don't know if you have contacted them, and maybe it would be very nice of you guys, all of you, that if you would establish some kind of cooperation between you. Yeah, just to make it easier for yourself. For example, Abdul Husseinovic has many movies made on that topic. So actually, it would be very nice if those movies actually were translated into English.
He has done it. He did do the English subtitles, but if you go to YouTube to check them out, you'll notice that the Bosnian version ones way more views than the English version ones. I have an explanation why that is. It's partly because it's hard to take a 2 hour film which throws lots of facts at you to a wide audience. It's a lot easier to reach them by telling a little horror story in 10 minutes, which is essentially what these are. They're horror stories. And it's a lot easier to reach people that way than it is with a dense 2 hour film with lots of facts. So he's very good, probably, at reaching the Bosnian speaking community with his films because they have the patience and the interest. But your typical person out there, they don't know what genocide is in Bosnia. They don't care by and large. So if I can get them sucked into the situation through a little story that really blows their mind a little bit, that's a lot easier way for me to get them. Now, the way he could help me, and maybe the way I could help him as well, conversely, is the amount of material and the details that he's collected and all that. That's where a good partnership can happen in the sense that he can feed me a lot of that. And in turn, I can actually point people towards him because once they do get interested in our stuff, some of his stuff is one of the first stops that's going to probably happen because he's the only one, and maybe a couple of other people that have made enough of these films, which have enough of these things all over the place, right? So that I think is where we can help, but I don't think making a 2 hour movie is going to be about getting the audience. It's going to be really an art project situation more so than anything. I've found that films are just not such a great way to reach an audience. Whereas I can actually have more views on one 10-minute video than a film that I've made that it took me 2 years to make and that got distribution. I can get more views in 10 minutes on Instagram. I think that's powerful. I think we need to take advantage of that and stop thinking about films and start thinking about social media as part of our education tools, which
I
I don't think we've
agree
done.
because people have the attention span is like,
Yeah.
5 minutes. So this is really a very important point. Now, before we turn to Professor Pettigrew, we have like it's already noon Eastern time, so 15 minutes. I just wanted to ask you if you have any recommendation or advice, or how do you deal with the local stakeholder representatives, politicians who are totally numb to this, even though they are.
Yeah.
Like,
They have zero interest.
I know, but
Zero interest.
I know. Do
Yeah.
you have anything that what we can do? Because we're doing their job. So,
Right.
what
Vote them
can
out.
you do?
Vote
What
them
can the
out.
diaspora do? How can you put pressure on them?
Vote them out. I would go ahead and say, and some of them should be in jail. That's a separate discussion for another topic, another day. But what I'm saying is, you got to vote them out. You got to get rid of them, and you got to bring in people.
Yeah,
I
but
think,
how?
honestly, I
Harun,
think
how?
one of the solutions is for diaspora to start coming back and then exerting their will,
Of course.
because I think a lot of diaspora is going to see stuff here and they're going to be like, that's not going to fly. All right,
Yeah,
like
but
the
the
countries.
diaspora comes back. Diaspora engages. We try, but there's so much resistance. They just brush you off. They're like, "Oh my
Right.
gosh, she's so annoying," which with her question, "Oh my gosh, like you're."
We need more
Sometimes I
people.
feel like I'm inspector, like I'm doing inspecting,
Yes.
and I would love to have an independent, objective inspection body, and taking care of all those lazy
Right.
people that are just on the payroll and actually they're not
Mhm.
contributing. They're actually doing favor to those that committed atrocities.
Yes.
So
Cooperating with them all the
yeah, so,
time.
so
Yes.
that's why, like, I'm opening this question. What can we
Mhm.
do? How can we put pressure? Because it is a bottleneck. It is a major bottleneck
Yes.
in our
I
country
think we
and
need
overall in the world.
I think we need a larger population of diaspora engaging. It needs to be bigger than now, and it needs to be basically a very, very loud 10%. If you ever look at changes in countries, a movement that led to changes, they're done by about 5 to 10% of very, very loud
Yeah,
people.
it takes a small group.
Yes. So what we need to do is we need to build a bit of an army, not a military, but a bit of an army online and a bit of an army of advocates and activists, which could then start exerting some power. And but it's going to be a hard battle. It's not going to be easy still, but we need those people. That's, I think, the step number one is to build that. But part of that is to get enough of them on the ground. One thing I'm noticing now is that a lot of people are returning to Bosnia. I am shocked by how many people are returning. Some that have been born in other places and some that are returning after many years. And I've now heard at least 100 people so far, just when I was around town. I think there's definitely a large movement now back towards Bosnia for one reason or another, and I think that needs to be captured. So what we need really is an organization to capture all those people and to organize around them, because I think a lot of them are going to look at what's happening here and not going to be very happy about some stuff. Like they'll
Well,
be
we
glad about
tried. I
something.
mean, even to run for president, what
Mhm,
happened to Professor Mirsad Haji, what's his name? He even ran for president.
mhm.
Professor, doctor who moved from Charlotte. So people are returning for over a decade. People are doing things, but I do not see any progress.
They're not organized.
I don't
That's
know
the
where
main problem. The main problem is they're not organized. Like if you go to different parts of the country, there are such people, but they're very small groups and very splintered. They're not like an organized group that has goals, that has things they want to accomplish and work in really much larger numbers. Like we just don't have these kind of organizations. At least I'm not familiar with one, which has like clear goals, clear objectives, whether that be an organization or political party, which has at least a 5 to 10% of the overall population in it. We
Right.
just don't have that. So we have to form that. We just haven't done that. That needs to be done. And that is hard work because you need to go find all those people. You need to get them recruited into it. And that is going to take, I can't even get 10 volunteers to help me with this project. I've been screaming for volunteers for like a year in different ways. And it's hard for me to get 10 people to help on a project where I'm asking them for very little of their effort. It's so hard now for me to recruit people that'll need to work day in and day out to make these kind of changes that you're asking for there. So it requires a much larger group of interested people, which just is not there. But I do think there is enough probably discontent among those that have returned, and maybe some people that have been living here to maybe try to get them recruited into an organization that then works really hard to make those changes. But I feel what I see with a lot of people is resignation. A lot of them are resigned. They might be unhappy about certain things, but they're kind of
Lethargic
resigned to the realities. Yeah.
and lethargic, yeah. So that's true. I mean, it's been going on forever, and I've personally been involved for 15 years trying to do things locally. I've been working in Bosnia on a lot of things, and I just find, yeah, the resistance, the bottlenecks, the people that are working for the government and the representatives, and but diaspora is very interested. Diaspora is very emotional. They want to return, but they don't want to return when there is no rule of law. They don't want to return because of the quality of life there. So
Right.
but yeah, because we're running out of time, I want to give it to Professor Pettigrew. And Mansud, I saw your hand. You can keep your question with Professor Pettigrew then.
Could I just ask Vildana, how much time do we have?
We have now 9 minutes.
Okay. Well, if it's okay with you, I'd rather hear from Mensud. Also, Envera had a comment in the chat, and so you could decide
Okay.
who goes first, Envera or Mensud. If there's time at the end, I have a comment, but I'd
Yeah.
rather hear from our guests. It's great to have guests from Canada.
Yes, Envera asked, anything actually done, especially positive in Bosnia, is done by anyone but the politician, unfortunately.
Correct. Absolutely.
She said, what is the end goal of your project? Would you try to influence the educational system in B? Or possibly have all these history pieces be actually taught in schools, or is it something else? I mean, for sure you want to educate, but
Yes. I mean, I do want to educate. I'm not so, I'm not so obsessed with this idea of putting this in schools. I just don't have the patience as a single person to, Smayo Beisha does this. So if you want to follow him and engage with him, he's the guy that cares about this, putting this in K through 12. I don't care about that. I care about a bully pulpit situation. I want a huge amount of people in the world to get educated on this subject and get to be our advocates and fighters for us. I want pressures to come from the outside onto the country in different ways. I want people to start coming to this country interested in these villages that nobody's visited in 25 years. I want them to know their names and to go engage with these places. So I guess my whole point is not these major systemic changes. I don't want to engage in sort of fairy tales. I don't believe in those things. I don't think they can happen quite like that. I believe in organizing large groups of people and educating them possibly, and maybe getting some of them to be angry enough or caring enough about some of these things, and to, go out and sort of fight on our behalf. I mean, what we're seeing in some other areas where genocides have happened, where people have engaged much more, from the outside with those places. I mean, I'm hearing people a lot now, engaging with, obviously Palestine is dominated, obviously, the last 2 years, but you're looking at situations in Congo, in places like Sudan. There's lots more people now engaged with that idea. The reason why is because they're getting educated on it. And why are they getting educated? Because of social media, not because of big films, not because of the school systems. They don't care about the school systems. The school system is a wrong place to do this kind of education because those kids can't wait to go home. It's just not an environment, right? I just don't believe in it, frankly,
Yeah, what I was thinking is, for many years is that, to organize trips for especially the millennials, the younger generations, when they come from America or Australia, when they come to Bosnia, instead of hanging out with their aunts and uncles and whatnot, which is, I mean, important too, but that we have organized trips that we take them to certain areas and, kind of make them curious, because what they don't know, they don't know. They cannot be curious about something they don't know. But to organize, like other countries, they organize trips to their home countries for the kids in diaspora. So why can't we do that? But of course, my idea, everyone's like, oh, those people don't care. They just want to go to Bosnia and go whatever, do shopping. I don't know. But I think that's wrong. Anyway.
It is wrong, but I do think that where we miss the boat is building essentially programs. Once they get to Bosnia, if you come here in this month, these are the places you could go, and build them a little map. We can do that.
Yes.
I can help do that. In fact, by the time
I
I'm
have
done
a
with this
whole
project,
program written and I was rejected by anyone, but I have a whole different why certain cities, from Foča, because
Yes.
I connected it to historical importance to kind of wake up this Bosnian, that Bosnia exists over 1,000 years. Why is the the particular, why is the Stečak important? It's all about building the Bosnian identity that has been, not just attacked in the 90s, but it was attacked and tried to be erased for, hundreds of years. So we're going to ask now Mehmedinović from Canada, right? Please introduce yourself and what's your question? Welcome, Mehmedinović.
Hi, everyone. I live in Toronto, Canada, and I'm heavily involved in board. I'm actually president of board, organizing board to commemorate Srebrenica genocide. That's one of the comments that I have in Canada for us in order to rally city halls to introduce this truth about our Bosniaks history and genocide. We have to use Srebrenica as a platform because we are completely legit. We are covered like with everything. We are slowly trying to push more advocating for recognizing genocides in other places. That's why this work and this kind of project is crucial. It's crucial for us to help introduce the truth to our neighbors, English speaking neighbors. Another comment that I have as a consumer living in this very busy capitalist regime is that written documents are very time consuming. So these kind of projects where you have 10 minutes of truth, like on video, this is what catches attention of people. This is what can help everyone. So in this like short comment, I would like to stay connected with you guys, and I would like to organize something, if possible, for you to visit us in Canada and to do some more work introducing the truth to Bosnian community, which is it's very hard. People here are busy surviving. Yeah. And it's very hard to rally people, to get them to commemorate something, to sacrifice their time. They're just busy surviving, but we can't give up. and we need to collaborate, all of us. So the long films, that's also like something that's like looking from my perspective. I lived through war in Bosnia. I left Bosnia in 2006, and still when I see this video, it wakes up my heart. And so that was like I'm really appreciating this opportunity to be connected with such great people. It's really honor and pleasure to be on the right side of the history. Okay, so it will be a moment in time when we will all get our recognition for the work we do. So I didn't actually have a question. I'm just admiring your work, and I wish you all the best. And definitely for this kind of work, you have support from Canada, and we can work on that to establish more help in future. Thank you so
I was
much.
going to say, for what it's worth, Emir Ramic has contacted me recently, and he's wanting to do stuff as part of this genocide association of, I think they also, I don't know if they're based in Toronto as well, but
Yeah, there is this genocide research
yes,
organization that he is leading, and he is like focused. The problem here, what we try to do for Srebrenica Memorial, and we all understand that we are using Srebrenica as a platform to widen the truth about other places, because other places, it was like more horrific crimes in other places. They just didn't have enough victims to kill. Okay, if they had like thousands of people in other places, they would do the same. But for legal reasons, we are grabbing to the platform of Srebrenica genocide, and we tried something here very unique in Canada. We organized this board that kind of collects leaders of all organizations, from religious organizations to cultural, to everybody who's like even like hunting clubs and fishing clubs. Everybody is there to rally more people to learn. So we would love to use this same platform to rally people to come and to see your presentation in one of our centers. And definitely Emir Ramic and his
that's what he's
organization
wanting. That's what he's wanting. He's wanting on the ground presentations and so on. So basically, everything you're saying, he's echoing that.
yeah, that's
To me,
we are all together in
yes.
we are trying to establish that culture of remembrance. And so all of this like is crucial. Like even like Avda Huseinovic's work is like very valuable. Your work is very valuable, and it's really nice to hear that something like this exists. It just like, you know, moralize you to push forward more. And we have so many obstacles. So whatever we try to push and get recognition in our city halls, we have strong pushback. We have very strong Serb diaspora in Canada, and they are very well connected and very willing to fight against the truth.
Yeah, they are. But my belief is that it's our fault. I don't give them credit. I say that we didn't do enough. That's kind of the way I look at it. I do think there's definitely a strong, but they're basically a bunch of pawns telling lies, and we have given them all the oxygen they need by not talking about it, by not asserting ourselves, and by not speaking the truth. So in other words, yes, they are very well organized, the Serb extremist types that are spreading the propaganda. But the reason why they have the oxygen is largely because we have given them the oxygen. That's my belief. But to each his own.
I also don't give them any credit. It's just like that's how it is. And in certain places, like we have this memorial in Windsor, Ontario. That's the first memorial outside of Bosnia that was dedicated to Srebrenica genocide. It's like in a very beautiful park, and a lot of Bosniak neighbors are just like scared and shy to show up on a yearly basis. The locals
Yeah.
because they live among people who are they're doing business with, and etc.
Yes.
It's still it's not gonna stop what we are trying to do. It's just like one simple it's just like another motivation for us, let's say, to have you with us for a presentation and stuff, and we just move forward.
Sure, sounds good.
We fight for truth. Thank you, guys. Thank you, everybody,
Thank
for
you.
participating.
Thank
This
you,
was like
Mansur.
really beautiful.
Thank you. I'm so glad that you could join us today. I wanted to also say, Harun, I mean, how can people stay in touch with you, reach out to you?
I'm just gonna
What's the
address just
best?
very quickly Andrew Kavesh's comment, just because he brought up who's to say that a short film is not an art and long film is art. I actually don't dispute that a short film is art. I'm just saying that when you do long films anymore, you do them for the art's sake. You're not really doing them for mass education. You're not getting the eyeballs on them. Does that make sense? Anything can be art. A 1 minute piece can be art. The length is not the question here. It's just that the longer it is, the less eyeballs you're going to get on it. That's just my opinion, right? I think based in facts. So in that sense, I am not in any way saying down with the short form. Short form can be beautiful art, equally as important as long form, just to make a point of that. Now, as far as me, how to get in touch with me or keep in touch is just stay on my social media. I'm going to be publishing everything there. I'm not doing any like mass emailing with this stuff. It's all going to be basically living on a social media in a social media realm. Um, and at this point, I've been, until very recently, largely doing this all on my own. I've gotten decent amount of support now with research. What I really need a lot of support now is funding this thing, because this thing is going to take at least 2 to 3 more years. I originally set aside 3 years for this whole thing. That's how much I sort of mentally set aside for it. It's more likely going to be longer than that, just because of the amount of stuff that needs to be done. So in other words, there needs to be support in funding it. There's only so much I can go, and because you've seen the stuff that I usually do outside of the realm of this project. I'm having to refuse to work on all those other things in order to work on this project. So in other words, and I have no institutional help. So we need to figure out a
Well,
way to
Harun,
make this
just to interrupt
sustainable.
you, we can do right now. Do you have a PayPal or where can people put money
Our
now?
main website. So if you go to any of my
Yeah, but
social
can you
media,
share it? So if people want to donate now,
yeah, it's just called theactsofreburial.com.
I've
So if you
shared
go
it in the
there,
chat.
yep,
But
there's like 10 different ways you could contribute, right? So that's needed, but really, it's going to be hard for a bunch of individuals to do that. There needs to be some organizations that really take that responsibility on as
okay.
well.
All right, I found your Venmo here.
Yep.
Okay, guys. There's the Venmo. And I mean, I know people are very kind of, lazy. I mean, even with inviting people to this event, you told me if you can share it on your Instagram, you shared it on Instagram and only 10 people registered after you shared it on and I don't know if any of those showed up for today's meeting. So,
Looks like some of them did, yeah.
yeah.
I frankly needed to do that earlier because people need a lot more lead time than less than a day. So my fault.
Also, I want to suggest for next time, Vildana, if you can also put, it was very difficult for me to figure out what is the correct time to log on. So if we can also have additional reminders of what time zones, like what is the accurate time for the meeting. So
Zoom didn't do that?
they didn't do it, and it also messed it up. My friend Aida also double checked from Sarajevo. So between the two of us, we figured out the correct time. But
I
yeah,
don't control Zoom. I mean,
yeah,
I registered and I get a reminder, 24-hour reminder, 10 from 10.
mine really saved that the meeting is at 5 o'clock, so it didn't transform the
Correct.
time.
Bosnia.
Yeah,
Bosnian
but it
time,
didn't
right.
transform mine. It was very confusing. Anyway, I invited a bunch of people, but I see very few have showed up. I mean, I see three of my friends here. Thank you for
Awesome.
coming. But everybody else wanted to come, but it was a little difficult to figure out when.
Yeah. Yeah, well, usually our working group, we're not so public. We on purpose keep the meetings a little bit smaller because if we have like 100 people participating, it's not as engaging and not as impactful as a smaller group. I'm not even sure how many people showed up today, but I think less than 20. But this is not last time we're meeting, so I think it's 2026. January. We have a lot of work ahead, and we have we have to remain our we have to remain commitment committed to our purpose and to each of us individually, not just Harun, and hopefully we can support him because he's already in the arena, so to say. He's fighting, and we don't have to be in the arena with him, but we can support him and organize fundraisers and spread the word. So that's, I think, the least we can do. So we can talk about this, how we can do it. Maybe we can meet Alma afterwards and discuss how we can do it really in a pragmatic way. So it's not just, empty talk. But was there something else in the comments before we close? Because I mean, you guys are more than welcome to stay. I have the Zoom channel open, so you guys are more welcome. I don't know if Harun has time. I want to respect his time too.
I'm good until about 6:45 here, so another
Okay.
15-20 minutes. Yeah.
15 minutes. So we have got Miro Pasic. Miro, are you here? He said, if anyone knows of Pasic family
I
in
am.
Beirut.
Thank you. Sorry, nice to meet you. I live in New York.
Hi,
How are you?
welcome. Do you want to
Yeah, I
how
was just curious. We've talked. I think I've talked to a few people here on this list. I was just curious. My family's from Mehmedinović outside Gutsko, and I don't know. I think it would be great in the future we get more people on these calls to find out a little bit where their family's roots are. I think it can connect people and last names and stuff. Just to find out information. And Harun has been great. We've just connected. I'm trying to dig into some tragedies that happened to two of my uncles in Mehmedinović outside of Gutsko and in Kozarets, in Omarska. So I was just curious to see if that connected with anybody. And I think what you guys are doing are great. I think I just have a couple comments kind of living through this. My father actually was one of the first people right after the war to bring attention to the genocide right in the 90s. He basically stationed at a mall in Kelowna, British Columbia, and was confronting people and discussing what was happening right during the war, and his family was there. So I think this is hugely important. One thing I've noticed over 20, 30 years in Vancouver and Canada, and even in Bosnia, and you guys have highlighted this, we are extremely fragmented. We have different groups. So it's very frustrating to see how many different, look at the politics, look at the amount of people are trying to win the elections. You don't see too many fragmented Serb groups or Croatians, but the Bosnians are very fragmented. So we don't have the numbers, and some of that self-interest, whatever it is, but also I think our identity. I think one of the things that frustrated my father in Vancouver in the organizations is there's very religious groups, which my father had wanted nothing to do with. And then there's, very kind of open European view and a mixture. And he felt like the identity of Bosnia, which you guys have highlighted, was very challenging on being unified. And that is another problem, I think, with us organizing. And we've been the victims throughout history. I am very frustrated at seeing propaganda. I have Croatian background as well, a little bit, but when I see what I'm watching on Facebook and some of the history changes and how much I'm hearing about their view of what happened in Bosnia, it's really frustrating. I know it's impossible to change, but it's amazing how brainwashing this is, the narrative, and how they're doing this and having a big impact on people second guessing everything. And you see what's going on in America with politics. I'm very nervous. Bosnia can be reignited immediately, in my opinion. And there's a lot of self-interest in Europe. And because of religious biasness, it is, I still think, a very dangerous situation. And the Serbs and Croats are crawling, and they're trying to get something back. And I think they might be able to negotiate that with an American president that seems to be open-minded about redrawing borders. Anyways, those are my comments.
Yep, I agree.
Thank you. Anything to
Completely
add,
agree.
Harun?
Well, on this issue, yes, I agree that the situation in Bosnia is much more precarious than people think at times, because they often tell me, well, this can be 1992, meaning, yeah, I agree. They're not having fourth largest army parked right in our backyard with the guns turned at us. That's not quite what's happening now. But there's many different forms genocide can take. And people are very sort of myopic about it. They're just too sort of small-brained about how they think about genocide. They'll think of it only one way or the two ways. if you organized a group of people that exploded 300 mosques across Bosnia with bombs, would that be exactly the same as it was back in 1992? Not really, because they could now target people at prayer. You understand? That's a form of genocide. That's exactly what happened in Christchurch. And the guy who did it in Christchurch, that killed people in two separate mosques, he was listening to a Serb song on his way over there, and he had all the Serb usual suspect genociders written on his gun. Do you guys understand that? The guy in Breivik, the guy who killed people in Norway, that killed all those people on that in that massacre that happened in Norway, he too, in his manifesto, says Serbs are his biggest heroes. You understand what I'm talking about here? So it's like people are so small-brained about when they think about genocide, what they think about genocide. Yeah, they're not going to roll into villages quite the same way, but they're going to find another way to do it. The whole idea here is there's impetus, ideas, zest behind finishing a genocide. And if you look at 1992 to 1995, 50% of the Bosniak population is gone, either killed or expelled from the region. And they're now in diaspora. So in other words, they were 50% successful, 1992 to 1995. So in other words, you're just finding new ways to get rid of more people. And now everybody's like, well, it's not going to be the same way as 92. No, it'll be another way, but it's going to be the same thing. So I agree. Mute.
Yes, thank you, Harun, and yeah, thank you to Pasic from New York. Yeah, please keep in touch with us with the working group for Bosnia Herzegovina. And we have a comment from Esha Sharif. I did not know these things. Thank you. Okay. Now, Professor Pettigrew, would you like to say something?
Oh, well, originally I was just going to ask some questions, and I thought it was better to have our guests participate. I think it's been valuable for everyone. The comment I had was that Harun's, so we want to support Harun, and you can find his work on social media and also something called Substack.
Yes.
I joined Substack so I could follow his presentations, his videos, and in one of these videos he tells the story about what happened in Biljani, if I pronounced that correctly, and also the fact that there have been so few prosecutions and so frustration at the process of legal justice. And recently, one of the perpetrators, I don't know if it was a result of his work, of Harun's work, or it's just coincidence that one of the perpetrators, Jovan Kevac, who fled to Serbia, has been indicted. And I thought that was important. And I thought it was a coincidence that in my documentary film, I have Amor Mausovic is talking about the exhumations related to Biljani, but there was one person prosecuted who ultimately was sentenced to 7 years in prison, which is also kind of an insult to the victims that the sentence was so short. But I was thinking that it'd be something the working group could do, which would be to write a letter to the prosecutor to encourage, that they dedicate themselves to bringing Jovan Kevac to justice, and helping to publicize that what the events in Biljani is just one other village where the genocide was carried out. The story of Jovan Kevac fleeing to Serbia is a similar case. There are perpetrators from Kalinovic, for example, who fled to Serbia, and the prosecutor hasn't had the will to prosecute them because there is an agreement between Serbia and Bosnia that these perpetrators could be brought to justice. But so I think it might help. The working group might be able to help by writing an open letter to the prosecutor. But that's a proposal we could discuss at another time.
I was gonna say I do plan to do a video down the road in which I actually state a few cases which are egregious non-prosecutions. I would say egregious because of the amount of evidence, the amount of So Bilani was one of them, but there's about 6 or 7 of them which are like, you're not going to believe how they didn't prosecute this kind of thing. So I was going to do a little video and just tell people we need to put our collective efforts to make these our goal, like get these prosecuted, because they are not going to be hard to prosecute. There are mountains of evidence in all those cases. There just has not been the will, or it's been dysfunctional, really. The tužilaštvo, the prosecutor in Bosnia is highly dysfunctional entity.
Well, Samir Vranović from Kalinovic could help you with details about the perpetrators who fled to Serbia.
Yes. Yep. I would love that. It's one area I haven't had some speakers that I've connected with, Kalinovic massacres and everything that happened there. Did we miss any questions in the chat? Sorry, I didn't scroll through all of it. So
Yeah, I just provided the link to all the donation.
okay.
You have a specific donation tab. And then, yeah, I really like the idea from Professor Pettigrew about writing the letter to the prosecutor. But of course, we would have to write it in English. Harun, do you have any channels or any connections with the English-speaking media or portals?
I mean, I have had a lot of connections over my other project called Skyglow, which was massively covered by every imaginable media. But the subject there was, let's just say, user-friendly, meaning
Yes.
this is like child for children level sort of stuff. It's not dark subject. So in other words, there was a huge amount of interest to cover that. But something like this, I'd be shocked if I can get one of those places motivated to do it. I mean, they often don't even cover things that happen in America as it relates to war criminals. You know, every so often they catch war criminals, for example, in America. But when you look at the reports on that, they're scarce, hard to find, practically not there. But it's interesting. You would think that'd be an important thing to cover, that a war criminal was caught in America. But nope, they just totally ignore it. So it's a hard one to motivate the people I know, which are really American media, to do. So that really means that we fall down onto social media situations and also local media in Bosnia, which I have found are often very hostile to the subject, to put it mildly. Hostile would be the right word. It's not that they're not even interested. They are more likely to berate me than to actually help me. Yeah.
And they ridicule you and they,
Yeah.
change your sentences so that it's more, and then
Yeah.
even the comments of people on our local newspapers, how it's very insultive and actually very contaminated and
Yes.
actually does more harm than good, So I would, if
agree.
any one of you guys knows about English-speaking media, how we can get in touch and, to help us put pressure, that would be, please contact us, let us know about, whether portals, newspapers or magazines, whatever. Substack is a great way to, can you, Harun, share your, I tried to look you on Substack, I couldn't find.
I'll share it right here.
Is it with your name?
It's under the Acts of Reburial.
Okay.
Substack.com.
Okay.
I'll write it out.
Thank you. And Valida suggested
Vildana,
you can do these meetings once a month with you, Harun. So if you guys are interested, thank you so much.
Vildana, I was just going to make a couple of maybe closing comments.
Thank you.
First of all, thank you, Harun, and thank you all of you for joining us. And we're going to take the liberty of adding all of you to our email list. We started the working group for Bosnia and Herzegovina about 5 years ago. And one of the areas of major focus for our group was combating genocide denial and the glorification of convicted war criminals. So, Harun, your work directly ties into a major goal for this group. So I'd offer an invitation for those of us who are here today to join in those efforts. But my comment, and I'm very inspired in a sense, Harun, because I think you found the right time to do this. I think you've really tapped into timing for those of us who've been doing this work for a while, but also a newer generation of both Bosnians and non-Bosnians who are receptive to hearing this story and this information now. And it's not unlike after the Holocaust, there was a period of time that had to pass before people were ready to deal with the reality of the genocide that had occurred in Europe. I think also your format is exactly the right one, and it's very, very relevant to a new generation of these short narratives that can be watched and absorbed. And already we're seeing the momentum of the growth in the number of people who are following you online. So I'm very hopeful about that, and just wanted to offer those comments. Thank you to everybody.
Yeah, and I was gonna just say off of that, the reason why I chose to do it the way I chose to do it is because I inherently like felt this is the right moment to do it, which is why I guess to answer that earlier question in maybe a different way about like why now is because I knew at a time in history that this is the right time to do it. It's like it's now or never kind of a thing, which is why I jumped into it without any support. Usually with these kind of projects, you take years to try to garner support and get funding and do all that sort of stuff, and you do a lot of research from home every so often on it. But I just kind of knew if I don't go and do it and just kind of jump into the fire, that it is not going to happen. We're going to miss the chance to do this in the right time. That's why I did it. And I think it's looking like it's resonating with a lot of people, which is good. And it just needs to keep on going. I think this needs to be it's a bit of a slow burn. Like it's going to take a long time to get through a lot of these things. To cover each part of this country is going to take a long time. I mean, I'm in Mehmedinović now, and it's going to take me a month just to cover those 7 stories. These are not easy things to research. They're not easy things to get footage of, places to visit. It's covered in snow, hard to reach. So it's all these challenges. So in other words, I've kind of accepted this will take years. I just need to find a way to make it sustainable. That's the big challenge now. And there needs to be a lot of people to help with that because there's only so much I could do. So
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Harun. I know it's challenging and I know it's difficult. I know it's painful, it's traumatizing, re-traumatizing. It's but it's testimony. What you're creating is a testimony. You're combining art with testimony. And I always say to myself when it's really difficult, I was not there. My family, for better or for worse, we left in 92 because we were uprooted. And but I always think, but my father stayed. When it's the most difficult, like the one thing I just owe it to my father. How was it for him to be there all those years, starving, how challenging was it really? So what we're doing, I'm even embarrassed to say, oh my gosh, sometimes this is so challenging. My work as a advocacy is challenging. Actually, it's not. So I mean, thank you for that. And I just want to, if anyone have a closing, because we're closing now, if anyone has any comments, anything to say, please, raise your hand before we close the session today. In the meantime, Harun, I want to thank you again for your time, for your courage, for your vision. For your commitment to truth. And I want to thank to each one of you, Alma, Mensud, Envera, Valida. I mean, all of you that joined us today. We have 19 people right now. I want to thank each one of you individually for participating, for being here with us today, because without you also this wouldn't be possible. And if history is written by the victors, when memory is preserved by those courageous enough to resist forgetting. So projects like this are, resisting the forgetting, and they remind us that silence is not neutral. Silence has never been neutral. We see it today, what's happening in the world. So silence is political. So everyone who remains silent is being political. And I want us to, think about this memory. What does it mean, memory? What is and how memory functions? And it's not just a record of the past. Memory is also a map for the future and also to prevent from these atrocities for happening. That's why we have remembrance. And I also want to say that, yeah, every act of remembrance is an act of defiance. So, and I hope we can continue to speak. I hope we can continue to document and support those. If we can't document ourselves, I hope we can continue to support those who document, like Harun, to support them to resist and, of course, to remember. So that would be it from me. And Alma says, Harun, take care of yourself. This type of work is hard, will have impact on mental health. You need to have support and debrief. And Esha said, I wish we could get testimonies from people like your father. It could have been, I have my father's journal and things like art therapy. Yes, I absolutely agree with you, Esha, that art is very healing and it's a way, yeah, of a therapy. I hope things change in the future. Thank you. All the best. Thank you, Esha, for joining us. And, I'm going to close unless anyone else wants to say something. Harun, do you want to say anything?
Not much. I mean, thanks for everybody who came, and thanks for everybody who supported me. And some people in here have been big supporters, and I really appreciate that. And I hope, I mean, I've set something very ambitious forward. I don't know if I can physically and mentally do it. We'll find out. I don't know if I can do it without somebody putting a bullet in my head. That could certainly happen. So in other words, let's hope that we can follow this whole thing through to the end, and there's going to need to be a lot of people helping. So.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Let's do a monthly.
Yes, we will meet again.
Okay.
We will stay connected. Maybe if Harun, we can if you have few minutes after this to talk.
Yeah, I just have to do one thing and then I can talk for a couple of minutes here.
Perfect. Okay, thank you.